Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Spanish United Radio. I'm your host, Enrique Sanchez. Today, we have a very special guest today. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yes, hello. This is Nestor Fantini, and thank you, Enrique, for inviting me to Spanish United. It's a true pleasure.
Welcome. Thank you for being on the show. We met last Sunday at the coalition meeting of Burbank, and I was intrigued about your history. So, can you give a little bit of a background of your history in Argentina about
Yes,
how your political issues happen over there?
absolutely. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm currently an adjunct professor of sociology at Rio Hondo College, and I also am the co-editor and co-owner of HispanicLA.com. Uh, I have a strong allegiance to Amnesty International because of my own personal life story, and I'm going to be talking about that in a minute.
Mhm.
Uh, and by the way, it was a true pleasure to meet you there at that meeting. I think that they were at a point in which it's so important to join forces in terms of dealing with all the challenges that the new administration has been presenting to us. Huh?
Absolutely, especially when it comes towards Hispanics. I feel that all Hispanics, regardless of nationality, should work together because, we are facing persecution right now.
Absolutely. About 5 years ago, I wrote an article that I published in Medium, and in that article, I talk about the kidnapping of this American who had been involved in some demonstrations. I believe it was in Portland, Oregon.
Hmm.
And when I read the events, I was shocked because I suddenly realized that there you had all the components, all the ingredients of what had happened in Argentina in the 1970s when the Argentinian military introduced state terrorism.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, now, I think that we're in chapter two. Now, again, we see that the things are happening in the country, especially to the Latino community, that are very similar to what happened in the past in Argentina, and mainly in terms of the violation of individual rights.
Hmm.
Uh, Probably, you're interested in what happened to me. And of course, I'm willing to answer all the questions that you might have. Huh?
Hmm.
But I was a student and a worker also. I used to work in Ica Renault, a major auto factory in Cordoba, Argentina, uh, a city of about 1 million people.
Hmm.
And the city also that had a lot of students. So that combination of students and workers in the 1970s was a very important element in terms of challenging military dictatorship that have governed Argentina.
Hmm. Hello? Hello?
Córdoba,
Hmm.
where I was tortured, and then I was there for about a week and a half, and then at some point I was taken to different political prisons. Huh? First
Hmm.
UP1, then Sierra Chica, then La Plata, and finally released in 1979. And keep in mind, I spent almost 4 years in political prisons without any charge.
Hmm.
4 years in political prison until they allowed me to leave the country in April 1980, and I went as a political refugee to Canada,
Hmm.
where I was welcomed by the Canadian government, and where I was able to finish college, and then at some point moved to the U.S. Uh, so when I see what's happening to people that are seeking asylum nowadays, I'm really horrified because my experience was the experience that most people should go through. When you feel persecution, when you feel that you need to leave your country because of different factors, because of political corruption, authoritarianism, environmental factors, et cetera, when you think that your life is in danger, the life of your children are in danger, I mean, you should have the right to go to another country and seek asylum according to so many international treaties that we have, and that the U.S. is also that the U.S. has also signed. So I mean, that's not happening, as you know. I mean,
Hmm.
now, I mean, the asylum seeking process has come to a standstill. It's impossible to enter the country, and although the U.S. has a right to control its border, of course, it has to do it in a humane way. That's not happening.
Right.
Um,
And right. So,
in in 1976, that was probably the hardest year that I experienced in Argentina.
mhm,
I was in the UP1, uh, Unidad Penitenciaria 1 in
mhm,
Córdoba. And in that year, I mean, that's when the military coup took place in March 1976. And by the way, I mean, the past Monday, was the 49th anniversary of the military coup. In Argentina, it's a national day. No one works. It's a national day, and that was recognized and voted for by Congress uh, years ago, decades
mhm,
ago, and um, and there were big demonstrations, and more than 1 million people all over the country reminding society that what happened in March 1976 should never happen again. Huh? Nunca
mhm,
más, like they say,
mhm,
that they are against state terrorism. And there were families, children marching all over in Buenos Aires, Córdoba, Rosario, Mar del Plata, all over the place. And uh, and the thing is that I was part of all that in the 1970s. I was a victim of state terrorism. In that year, 1976, I was in UP1, as I mentioned, and that's where the General Menendez, uh, that was in charge, Luciano Benjamin Menendez, he already passed away. He was in charge of all that region that was called the Tercer Cuerpo de Comando del Ejército, the Third
mhm,
Army Corps, and and he was probably one of the most extreme right-wing generals, um, and he completely ignored the law. And let's keep in mind that in those days, I mean, what the military were doing was to actually they closed down Congress, they appointed their own judges, they banished political activities and some political parties.
mhm,
So if you actually challenge anything that they said, I mean, you were considered an enemy and you were imprisoned or executed. And there were actually more than 30,000 people that disappeared. And
mhm,
what happened was mainly that the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force had organized themselves into task forces, and they will actually go and kidnap people all over the country, people that they consider to be political dissidents or people that were unlucky in the sense that they were in the agenda of someone else because they were friends of that person. So at some point, there were 30,000 Argentinians that disappeared, and in other words, that were executed by the military because they set up this structure of terror in which, I mean, they did not acknowledge what they were doing. And what this implied was that at some point, I mean, they will go to your home, they will go to your place of work, and they will actually kidnap you. They will take you to a concentration camp, and everybody was tortured. And at some point, I mean, they made a decision of actually killing you or sending you to a political prison. Um, Usually, most of the kidnappings, and there's a study here by CONADEP that was done in 1983. Most of the kidnappings took place at home, 62%, and 25% people walking on the street.
Hmm.
70% were the males, and 62% of the kidnappings took place during the night. Hmm?
Right.
It, 59% were people between the ages of 21 and 30, so in their 20s.
Right.
60%. Most of them were students and workers. Huh?
Hmm.
Actually, 51% were workers or students. And believe it or not, 11% were teenagers between the age of 16 and 20. 16 and 20. And also, they appropriated many babies. Many babies. Huh? Nowadays, it's estimated about 500 babies uh, were taken by the military and given to the families that were friendly to them,
Hmm.
or they kept them themselves. So
Wow.
there is a big effort to try to recover the identity of those people. They have already uh, recovered the identity of 139 babies who found themselves to be in families that were not their biological families, of course,
Right.
that the military had killed their parents.
Hmm.
Uh, and, um, and 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 of course, I mean, and let me get back. So in 1976, and that's the context of Argentina in 1976, people being kidnapped, being sent to concentration camps, being executed, being thrown from planes into the waters of the Atlantic Oceans after being drugged. So that's the reality of Argentina in those days. Huh?
Hmm.
And I'm in 1976 in the middle of all this, in this political prison in Cordoba, where General Menendez starts to take prisoners out of the prison and execute them one by one. In total, there were 31 prisoners that were executed in UP1 between March and December 1976. And I have many names and many
Right.
stories. Huh? One actually was executed inside the grounds of the prison. His name was Paco Bauduco. He was a
Hmm.
student of journalism. And at some point, they took us all out to a big yard. We were all naked and we were all against the wall of the prison.
Right.
And they were beating us. And at some point, he fell to the ground. And a non-commissioned officer approached him, put his gun on his
Hmm.
head, and told him to get up. And when he didn't get up, he shot him.
Oh, wow.
Killed
That's
him
horrible.
in front of all of us. And again, 31 names. Balduco, as I mentioned, Pablo Balostra, Jose Muscarso, Hugo Bacanarvaja, etc., etc. 31. Um, and then in December of that year, they told me, okay, get ready. So they took me to another area of the political prison. We found out that there were about 20 political prisoners there, and they got us in our knees and told us to pray. So we started to pray, and Padre Nuestro que estás en los cielos, and because supposedly they were going to execute us.
Hmm.
So they took us to a truck, to trucks, and we were blindfolded. We couldn't see, of course, handcuffed. And at some point, I mean, we arrived to this place where you can hear the noise, strong noise of an engine. Uh, they took us from the trucks, and it was a plane. So they put us in a cargo plane, and we were up in the air for quite a while. And of course, I mean, we were thinking that that was it. Um, but suddenly, I mean, the plane landed again to some other tracks, and then they took us to another political prison. And
Mm,
that was the political prison of Sierra Chica in the southern region of the province of Buenos Aires. A lot of hills there. And what we thought that it was the end, in reality, it was an improvement in terms of our quality of life because all this region was under the jurisdiction of a different general who was not as extreme as General Menendez. So we knew that here our chances of survival had increased considerably. So I was there between 77 and 78. I was interviewed by the Red Cross. At some point, I was able to see my relatives. My mom, actually, she told me that I had been adopted by Amnesty International. And wow, that meant a lot. That meant so much because that meant that there were millions of people out there, people that belong to this international organization, that knew who I was. And that was a very important factor in terms of being able to survive psychologically, but also physically, in the sense that the chances of being killed by the military diminished.
mm,
So as things started to improve, then I mean, in 78, they took me to another political prison, the La Plata,
mm,
where I was there, and I was able to see walking in another yard this guy by the name of Adolfo Perez Esquivel, who um, in 1980 won the Nobel Peace Prize. Hmm?
mm,
Uh, and by the way, I have this fogon. We meet once a month with people from all over Latin America, the US, and Canada. And then on April 4th, Friday, April 4th, we're going to have Adolfo in our event. So it's a virtual event. So, of course, you are invited, Enrique. Huh?
I
Uh,
appreciate it. I would like to go.
It's in Spanish, by the
No, I
way.
understand Spanish fluently. I'm Latino.
Perfect, perfect. So, Pérez Esquivel, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, will be there. It will be an honor to have him there. So, I was in La Plata till the 79. And at that point, in July 1979, I was allowed to leave the political prison. Someone from Amnesty International that had been in touch with my mother and also had been involved in terms of my case. And don't forget, I had been adopted as a prisoner of conscience in 1977. This person was there. She was there in La Plata when I was released on July 14th, 1979. And then, I mean, at some point, I mean, things they develop in such a way that I developed a relationship with her, and we married. We moved to Canada, where I became I was a political refugee, um, until we decided to move to the U.S. But I mean, what happened to me in Argentina? I mean, it's what happened to so many Argentinians, especially the young people, professionals, huh? Lawyers, priests, etc. And the thing that's really concerning is that, I mean, I came to the US from Canada. Uh, and by the way, I was educated in elementary school in the American school in Cordoba. It was
Mm,
called Academia Arguello. Half of the day was in Spanish, half was in English. And I came to the US because I had a strong tie with the US in that sense. Um, and this was the land of Jefferson, Madison, Franklin. This was the land of freedom. And that's why, I mean, I don't believe in the American dream because as a sociologist, when I look at the numbers, I come to the conclusion that there is so much inequality, that we always had so much inequality, that I mean, the American dream is almost impossible for broad sectors of the society.
right.
But despite the fact that I don't believe in the American dream, I think I'm an example, ironically, I'm an example of the American dream because I
Mhm.
was able to build a middle class life uh, and uh, and have what most people should have, not only here but also in different parts of the world.
Right.
And but the thing is that having said that, and acknowledging what a beautiful country this is the country of Edison, of Franklin, of Martin Luther King Jr. This is a beautiful country. But despite that, I mean, suddenly we entered in a period of time in which there is so much institutional and political darkness that it makes me challenge some of the beliefs that I had about the US. So I was talking about that guy that was kidnapped in Portland
Mhm.
by the authorities in an unmarked van, similar to what was going on in Argentina. They didn't torture him, nothing happened to him, but the methodology that was being used was very concerning. And now, I mean, and not now, but I mean afterwards, then, and if you look at the context of the past few decades, I mean, you see that here in the US, some people within the Department of Justice actually rationalize and legalize the use of torture. They didn't call it torture, huh?
Right.
But they were tortured. They actually rationalize the kidnapping of people in different parts of the world.
Mhm.
They didn't call it kidnapping, huh? They call it, I believe, extraordinary rendition, for example.
Mhm. I've heard the term
And,
before.
and they also, I mean, set up all these concentration camps that were outside the jurisdiction of American law. Huh?
Right, like what's happening in El Salvador right now. Bukele's government is taking all political prisoners and immigrants from the United States to El Salvador because American law doesn't apply over there. Same thing with Guantanamo. Even though Guantanamo is technically U.S. territory, it falls outside of U.S. jurisdiction, and that's something of a concern because especially now with immigration. I'm seeing that ICE has turned from enforcing immigration to becoming the new Gestapo. And many Hispanics that I've spoken to have told me that they feel that they are in fear. And right now, many Hispanic people feel that they cannot be out because they're afraid of being arrested. You know, even Hispanics that are American-born citizens that have been affected by these racial deportations. The way that I see it and Spanish see it, it's a form of ethnic cleansing, and this is something that's been wanting to be done by a long time. I'm not saying it's everyone, but a lot of the American far right, especially those in red states, feel that they are under threat, that their values are under threat, that their demographics are under threat. So, you know, they feel that these people that are immigrants, you know, are destroying their life, but they don't realize that it is corporations that are actually bringing down the wages and making the standard of living unbearable to live. And this is something that I feel that unless people address the social issues of our country by taking it out on immigrants or persecuting people that are just victims of the establishment like they are, it could cause a reaction that could lead to possible civil war. Like I said it in many of my talks in the past, that's similar to what's happening in Europe, where many Muslims that have been there for generations don't feel that they're part of the country, and many have been radicalized by ISIS, by Al Qaeda, by different Islamic fundamentalist organizations. Same thing could happen here with Hispanics. They could be radicalized by the cartels, by criminal gangs, and that could create a chain reaction that could destabilize the country because, as you know, Hispanics are growing in a large number. So I feel that in order for Hispanic people to have stability, I believe that Hispanics need to be included in the economy. And I'm not talking about the informal economy, which is, services. We need to have more Hispanics that are doctors, scientists, politicians, leaders, because they could be an example to others. Like my organization, Spanish United, even though we're still at the grassroots level, we're trying to be an example to others because there's not too many Hispanic organizations that exclusively want to see the betterment of the Hispanic community. We're not a political organization, but we strive to see Hispanic people do better because I do have a concern that with these all these deportations and Hispanics not having any type of direction, particularly younger people, they could become susceptible to domestic terrorism, and then the establishment can use that as a pretext to invoke what is called the Enemy Aliens Act, like what this current administration is doing with Venezuelans, with Cubans, and Nicaraguans. So we need to educate the Hispanic population on how we can better ourselves. At the same time, we need to be more involved in the political process.
Absolutely. And I think that those two the factors that you mentioned, education and involvement in the political process are crucial. Because absolutely, within the Hispanic community, nowadays there is so much fear. Some people are they losing their job because they don't go to work regularly because they are so concerned, so scared. Some kids are not being sent to school because they are concerned. Don't forget now, the Trump administration uh, has is allowing immigration to actually enter the churches and schools,
Mhm.
something that it's really inconceivable.
Even
So
hospitals.
in hospitals, exactly, in hospitals. And by the way, I mean, in the past 72 hours, there are reports that they are also putting pressure on the IRS to get the information regarding undocumented immigrants,
Mhm.
addresses and so on. So I mean, it's starting to look like an authoritarian state without any doubts. Huh? Uh, the traditional definition of authoritarianism versus totalitarianism, definitely an authoritarian state. I mean, on the other hand, I mean, there is some little hope because in terms of institutions, and let's keep in mind that something critical is the, having three branches of power. I mean, three branches of government, and in some courts are challenging what Mr. Trump is doing. Huh?
Mhm.
So we don't know what happen once the whole appeal process takes place. We don't know what's going to happen when the U.S. Supreme Court also finally rules in terms of many of these issues, especially keeping in mind that this is a very conservative court. But there is some hope, also keeping in mind what the John Roberts, the head of the U.S. Supreme Court, what Justice Roberts said. In other words, I mean, a little warning or a reminder that the executive branch should not put pressure on the judicial branch, that they should allow the appeal process to continue its natural process. Huh? So
Mhm.
there's some hope still. But on the other hand, I mean, we see so many affronts, so ignoring the Constitution, ignoring individual rights, ignoring the due process, that of course, I mean, it creates so much fear. And not only among the immigrant community. I think that this fear is spreading to other institutions as well, other sectors of civil society. Look at the law firms, the way that Mr. Trump is persecuting
Mhm.
some law firms, um, and also the media as well. I mean, I know people that now are starting to think twice in terms of what they're publishing. So this is very concerning indeed.
Yeah,
This is very concerning.
it's called self censorship.
Absolutely, self-censorship. And of course, I mean, there are certain red lines that have not been crossed yet. And I'm confident that the American democracy is going to be able to resist this offensive of these intolerant sectors. Huh? But
Right.
we are in a very dangerous situation, very far from the ideas of the Enlightenment, very far from the idea of some of the founding fathers. Huh? And that's why I think it's so important to, like you said, to educate, huh? And also make sure that you join groups, alliances to be very proactive. Because this is a time, like I always mention the Martin Luther King saying that there comes a time when silence is a betrayal. Hmm?
Mm.
So at this point, I mean, we cannot remain silent. I mean, we need to protect those who are in fear of being persecuted. We need to make sure that we educate in our case, the Latino community, that they, in the case of undocumented immigrants, that they know that when someone comes knocking at the door and they want to enter into their apartments or homes, I mean, that they should not open the door. They should not open the door, and they should only open the door if
There's a
they
warrant.
have a warrant. Exactly. If there's no warrant, no opening the door. And that they, on the other hand, I mean that they should be prepared legally in terms of all kind of the documents um, to ensure that if something happens to them, I mean that someone will be able to take care of their kids, that someone will be able to deal with their properties if they own homes or
Right.
apartments, cars,
Because
etc.
yeah, because right now many Hispanics that have been deported, many of their properties and assets have been confiscated by the government. So because this is the interesting thing. Even though the Constitution says that private property is to be respected, it unfortunately doesn't mention anything about protecting the property of undocumented people. It only refers to citizens. So this is where they find a loophole to legally confiscate property without technically having to violate the Constitution. And this is what I'm seeing with many Hispanic communities where their homes have been raided, they have been deported, and they have nobody to leave their assets to. And what happens is that it gets confiscated by the government. That's what's happening in Texas right now. There was like a little community where they said, that there was undocumented immigrants. The government sent ICE agents to raid that neighborhood, and all those homes have been confiscated by the government. And I feel it just takes away ownership of, let's say, of relatives that are U.S. citizens. But that's a problem. And unfortunately, many Hispanics, they don't think about the future. They only think about the moment, is the mañana mentality. And I think that's something that needs to change because other races and other ethnicities like Armenians, Jews, Asians, many of
Yeah,
them come from worse background than
absolutely.
we do, but they always plan and make sure that they have their assets in order in case they have to flee or they have to leave. They leave their assets in check. And I feel that this is where workshops like myself come in because many of our people we're not taught the basic principles of finances, of money, of investing, or you know these basic things that wealthy people take for granted. So I feel that it's very important that Hispanics need to be educated on laws. So that way, when things do happen legally, if it does happen, at least their assets will be protected, or they could pass it on to someone that's either family that's American citizens or to those that are or that are they can trust. Because when wealth is confiscated from a people, it just destroys an entire community. And the Hispanic community is already destroyed and beat down as it is. The little things that Hispanic people have been able to build through work, I don't want to see that be taken away from them, and then it just destroys an entire community and just puts them down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And let's keep in mind, I mean, what happened to the property of Japanese Americans. And they were citizens,
Right,
Japanese Americans, not only immigrants, but also citizens whose many lost everything that they had once they were sent to internment camps in the 1940s. But
right.
And I also want to emphasize, I mean, don't think that's not going to happen to you. Don't feel that you're completely protected because this is a time of big challenges. Huh? What they are doing, although in many instances completely unconstitutional, I mean, you might be deported and end up in El Salvador or Panama or Mexico. And once you are out here, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to change that, almost impossible. Even if they declared some of the measures that he's taking unconstitutional. So it happened already. Let's keep in mind the American history. I mean, it happened in the 1930s. 500,000 were deported.
Yeah, that
So
was under
Mexico.
Operation Wetback.
And that's in the 1950s, wetback,
Mhm.
300,000 as well. I mean, so it happened in the 30s, it happened in the 50s. And of course, I mean, like you pointed out before, I mean, there's a big concern among certain sectors of society. Some will say the WASP group of society that it's concerned about the what they call the Great Replacement. Hmm?
Right.
They are concerned, and this is not something new. I mean, you can trace the information to the
Right,
1960s
of
and
course.
70s. Here in California, for example, we had this guy by the name of Pat Buchanan in the 1990s who wrote several books. He was a presidential candidate, a Republican
Yes, I
presidential
remember
candidate.
him.
Yeah. And I mean, Pat Buchanan also was talking about the cultural war that was emerging. And he was concerned about having so many the Latinos in the US. Huh?
Right.
Eh,
Governor Pete Wilson, when he was governor of California,
right.
he also had expressed the same thing.
And that's when Proposition 187 came into place. And and remember the proposition that actually was trying to kick the most undocumented kids from elementary school, not only high schools, elementary schools, that denied the health care services to every single undocumented. But it was never implemented thanks to a federal judge. Huh?
Right.
Anyway, but I mean, 60% of Californians voted in favor of Proposition 187. And I'm sure that that's the seed of what later spread throughout the next 2 decades and led to the emergence of Mr. Trump, along with
Right.
many other factors, globalization, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Absolutely. Anyway, Nestor, we have come to the end of our time. I am on a timer here on my Zoom, but I want to tell you thank you so much for being a guest on the show. And for those that are listening, we are available on all social media platforms. We are on Spanish United YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and X. And anyone that wants to donate, you're free to do so. And I will share with you the link, and you can share with all of your colleagues. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Enrique. Huh?
Have a wonderful day.